Hi, my name is Connor Riley. On tonight's Connor in Coverage, we're talking wingspan, upside, length, motor, and other NFL draft buzzwords as the NFL Combine is here this week, and Georgia will be very well represented in Indianapolis. Hello, everyone, and welcome in. My name is Connor Riley here for DawgNation. This is Connor in Coverage. We are here every Sunday night at 7:30 Eastern Time, recapping the latest Georgia news, previewing what's to come ahead. And for this week, it's the NFL Combine. All eyes will be on that. 12 Georgia Bulldogs will be present in Indianapolis, going through various drills, meeting with teams, having medical checks, et cetera, as they get a chance to make their case for the 2023 NFL Draft. As I get some hamburger off my face there. 12 players will be represented there. A lot of eyes on them, obviously, especially given the way Georgia players performed last year at this event. As their headline indicates here tonight, is a chance for the Georgia program to once again make a statement. Last year, Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Trayvon Walker, James Cook, Zamir White, George Pickens were just some of the players that really shined and excelled at the NFL Draft Combine. And I expect, once again, Georgia to have a very dominant showing at this year's event. And with what we know about the Georgia football program at this point in 2023, this team, when they get a chance, this program really, when they get a chance, they like to make a statement. Think back to the Tennessee game. Well, yes, that was only a 27-13 final score. That was very emphatically a statement made by the Georgia program there that day. You think back to the national championship game against TCU. Team went out there and just laid the smackdown for 4 quarters. I could point to the SEC championship game against LSU there as well, even the season opener against Oregon, or the win against Ohio State, coming back in the manner in which they did. When this Georgia team and players of this Georgia program have a chance to make a statement, we have seen them come out and do that in recent seasons. And I expect that championship DNA to carry over into the NFL Combine this week. 12 players will be there. I will try and rattle them off my top of my head right now. Quarterback Stetson Bennett, running back Kenny McIntosh, wide receiver Kearis Jackson, tight end Darnell Washington, offensive tackle Broderick Jones, offensive tackle Warren McClendon. On the defensive side of the ball, you have Jalen Carter, you have Nolan Smith, you have Robert Beal, you have Kelee Ringo, you have Chris Smith, and rounding things off will be kicker Jack Podlesny. There are 12 players represented. Only Alabama has more with 13. That comes a year after Georgia had 14 guys at the Combine last year, I believe. So Georgia, once again, very well represented at this event. And I would expect a lot of these players to test extremely well. We'll lead here with Jalen Carter, who I think most in the mock draft community agree is the number one overall prospect, the number one overall player in this draft. I think it's probably unlikely he goes number one overall, just given the fact that it's a quarterback, league, and there are a number of top quarterback options: C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson has even gotten some buzz. I expect a quarterback needy team to trade up to where the Bears are with the number one overall pick right now, given they have Justin Fields. But whoever gets Jalen Carter is going to get an absolute prize. And I got a chance to talk to Daniel Jeremiah on Friday, and we touched on a number of different Georgia players here. And we'll start with Jalen Carter, who Jeremiah feels is the best player in the draft and a true one-of-one player. In terms of comparisons, look, everyone's going to throw out Aaron Donald because he's been the dominant player at that position for the past decade. For most players, I think that's pretty wildly unfair to walk into that and entering the league. But you watch Jalen Carter play at the collegiate level these last 3 seasons. He does some things that no one else in the sport has done. And I think he's got a chance this week to really go out there and show teams and scouts why he is such an elite talent and showcase why I think he should be, if not for quarterbacks, the number one overall player taken in the 2023 NFL draft.
Carter is a player, and he's it's overused, I guess, but I don't know how else to describe him. He's just a freak show when you're watching him. It just looks like he works at a different speed than everybody else on the field. The change of direction, he can kind of teleport from one gap to the next, and you're like, I don't even know how he got there, but you've got no chance. The offensive line coach at Georgia is a good buddy of mine, and Stacy Searles. And when I asked him about Jalen Carter, and he said when he comes to practice and doesn't want to get blocked, he's not getting blocked. I mean, he's just he's a unique player. If you want to see, the athleticism, go read my buddy Bruce Feldman's article about him and look at the dunk that he posted inside the article. You can see him with windmill dunking over 300 pounds. So he's an absolute freak. I think he's better than Quinnen Williams coming out, and I loved Quinnen Williams. So that's the type of player you're getting.
Yeah, Quinnen Williams went number 3 overall back, and I want to say the 2018 NFL draft out of Alabama, a similarly really talented player. And, Carter, look, I'll be really interested to see not so much what he runs in the 40, though, just given the way that the combine is, that'll draw a lot of attention. I think the 2 reps where he can really shine and excel are going to be the short shuttle 5-10-5, and then the bench press, where this guy was a state champion weightlifter in high school. And, we'll see how many he puts up there, but I think he's got a chance to really put up a crazy number. I believe Jamari Sawyer set the record or had the high amount for last year's event. And so I think Georgia's got a chance to really do well and excel there in that manner when it comes there. Carter is widely expected to be the first Georgia player off the board, and most would even probably agree he should be the first overall player off the board. The next Bulldog likely to come off the board will be in the first round. It will be Broderick Jones. And I think he's a guy that, entering right now, he's probably seen as the number 3 offensive tackle option. I think with a really strong week this week, I think he's got a chance to maybe even move up to that number 1 offensive tackle spot. Right now, Peter Skarnarski of Northwestern is sort of seen as the number 1 guy, and then you have Paris Johnson just behind him at number 2. All those guys are expected to be, top 20, top 15 draft picks. And look, Broderick Jones is going to test incredibly well at this event. He's going to measure in very well with very long arms. I expect him to test very well both in the 40 and in the 5-10-5 shuttle there. Bench press for him isn't necessarily going to be his forte because of the length of the arms, but when you want a guy at tackle, you want them to have those long arms. And I think Broderick Jones is a guy that, Brandon Adams and I have touched on this. He's not going to be an easy player to replace. I thought he was so dominant when he stepped in really in the national championship game against Alabama in the 2021 season. And you saw this throughout this past year. And going back and watching some of the Georgia games in the offseason and picking up things and looking at things, man, watching Broderick Jones was a ton of fun. Just seeing him get out there in the run game and just annihilate opposing defenders. And this is a guy who, when he came to Georgia, I think everyone assumed he would be a great pass blocker because of the upside there. But by the time he finished his career at Georgia, he was a guy who, in my opinion, was just as devastating in the run game, if not more so. And I think that speaks to the way he developed over the course of his career. And Georgia's put in quite a few offensive tackles into the league in recent years. Obviously, Jamari Sawyer had a ton of success for the Chargers this year after slipping all the way to the 6th round. Andrew Thomas put forth an all-pro season for the New York Giants this year. There have been a lot of really good offensive tackles come out of Georgia in recent years. I think Broderick Jones, with a strong week, has a chance to be yet another first-round pick from there. And Daniel Jeremiah, in his most recent NFL mock draft, had Jones going number 14 overall to the New York Jets, or number 13 rather, overall to the New York Jets. If he has a really strong week, which I think he can, there's a chance he sneaks into the top 10 and potentially goes as the number 1 offensive tackle in this draft.
When you look at Broderick Jones, I think his best football is still ahead of him. He's incredibly strong. He's incredibly athletic. What he can do in the second level stuff in the run game as well as in the screen game is outstanding. He sets a little bit of a unique set where he sets a little bit flat. So there are times where guys can get upfield on him, but then he shows you the ability to recover and hang in there. So, maybe a little top heavy at times. He gets a little over aggressive. He's pretty, he's a pretty physical player, but I think there's a lot to really like about him. I think he could play either side. I think he could play right tackle. He could play left tackle. That would be that's why I had him going there. I think it'd be
Yeah, Jones has a really high ceiling. I think of the sort of 3 first-round offensive tackles we see there, Johnson at Ohio State and Skarnarski at Northwestern, I think Jones might have the highest upside going forward of those guys. Skarnarski might be able to bump down to guard, and so I think the positional versatility there, along with being the most, finished product right now, is why some see him as the number 1 tackle option. But Broderick Jones is very clearly going to be a top 15 pick entering this year's NFL draft. There are a couple guys that are sort of on that fringe range at the end of the first round that we touched on with Jeremiah. Darnell Washington is a guy where it's really going to come down to what a team is looking for in that tight end position. Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, Dalton Kincaid out of Utah, even Luke Musgrove out of Oregon State. Him and Washington, those three guys in Washington are sort of competing to be first-round caliber tight ends. Those are guys who are all probably going to go from, say, pick 15 to pick 45. Back half of the first round, first half of the second round. It's a very deep class at tight end this year, and in some ways that might work against Washington a little bit. But from a physical marvel standpoint, I think there are going to be very few, if any, prospects that measure up to what Washington does this week. I'll be really interested in seeing what he checks in at weight-wise. We know he's tried to start last season at around 265 pounds and was absolutely chiseled in doing so. Probably played closer to around 275, 280. And that was pretty consistent throughout his career at Georgia, but 6'7", an absolute mauler in the run game. And as Jeremiah pointed out to me, and as you can read on DawgNation right now, playing with Brock Bowers, there might be reason to believe that because of the fact that he played with Bowers so much this past season, there's more that Washington can grow into. Still had pretty impressive receiving totals this year, but there's a thought that maybe, in a different system, he's asked to do a little bit more, can show a little bit more than what he did at Georgia, where because of the presence of Bowers, who was probably one of the best players in college football this past season, will be one of the best players in college football in 2023. Because of that presence, they asked Washington to do some different things at Georgia. And because of that, I think that impressed NFL teams, along with the toughness that you saw him display at the end of the season, playing through that ankle injury. And so I think very easily I could see a team like, say, the Cincinnati Bengals at pick number 27 falling in love with what Washington can do, both in terms of going forward as a pass catcher, but already right now as an extra blocker and offensive lineman there. So I think he's a guy to watch there. Similarly, stacked is the cornerback position this year, and Kelee Ringo is a guy who, if there's one guy, there are two guys that really, in my opinion, need to test very, very well this week to help their NFL draft futures. And when I say test well, I would probably include interviews there as well. One of them is Stetson Bennett, obviously, the public intoxication arrest in Dallas, along with the fact that there were questions about his size and whatnot. He's going to need to both interview well and test very well at the combine if he's going to ensure that he gets drafted. Obviously, did some great things at the University of Georgia. I don't think anyone can question his credentials as a college quarterback. It's fair to point out, as Jeremiah did, that he's got similar size to Bryce Young. And if many see Bryce Young as the number one overall pick, why can't Bennett be, say, a third, fourth, fifth round pick, et cetera, if he goes out there and tests very well this week? I think one of the things that Jeremiah fairly, in my opinion, pointed out is that Bennett can be a little bit of a streaky thrower where he'll make some really impressive throws. And when he's in a rhythm, he is really, really good. But there are some times, and I think Georgia fans will even agree to this, that there were some times that he made some throws that were a little head-scratching, not just in terms of, why'd you make that read, but even just missing a guy that was pretty open or underthrowing him or something along the lines of that there. So Stetson Bennett, absolutely. I think of the 12 players for Georgia this week, I think he's certainly got a lot of pressure on him. The other one is Kelee Ringo. It is a very deep, talented cornerback class. Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois, Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon, Cam Smith out of South Carolina. There are a lot of talented players I think that could potentially go in the first round at that cornerback position. And with Ringo, he's got elite measurables, and I think he's someone who is going to test very well. And how well he tests is probably going to determine whether or not he slides up into that first round or falls a little bit into the second round there. I don't think he's going to be the first cornerback taken. It sounds like that's going to be Witherspoon out of Illinois. NFL draft community really seems to like him. But if Ringo goes out there and tests really well and backs up what he did in college, because yes, while he wasn't perfect at Georgia, he was asked to do a lot, and more often than not, I think he did a very strong job for the Bulldogs. Made some big plays, obviously none bigger than intercepting Bryce Young in the 2022 National Championship game. Had an interception with Levis last year, had an interception against Hendon Hooker, who Jeremiah thinks could, were it not for his knee injury, would have potentially been a first-round pick at that quarterback position. So I think the two guys that really have a lot of pressure on them to go out there and perform well this week are Kelee Ringo and Stetson Bennett. It'll be interesting to sort of see how they go out about and handling that. Obviously, those guys dealt with varying levels of expectations throughout their Georgia careers, and even entering this past season, they both played a key role in the national championship game. And I know a story that I even wrote last spring was, okay, you've done this, now how do you follow it up? And they both did so, I think, excellently this past season. And it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that once again for Georgia. But we want to end here on another guy that actually Jeremiah did have going into the first round, and I don't expect him to work out this week. I think the plan is for him to ultimately get to 100% in April and have a chance to show teams at a private event what he can do and how he can test. But Nolan Smith, is a guy who I expect teams to love in the interview setting. This guy loves football, is a great teammate, a captain at Georgia. I think represented everything that Georgia was about, not just this past season, but throughout his entire Georgia career. And I think is a player that NFL teams are very much going to like. The NFL comp for him has been Hassan Reddick, and we'll have Jeremiah here touch on that a little bit. I think one of the interesting things is, when Reddick was coming out, he did rush the passer exceptionally well, and the teams thought, okay, maybe we can use him in a variety of different ways. Well, he struggled in being sort of that multifaceted outside linebacker, but when the Eagles just let him get after the passer this past season, you saw just how devastating he was, especially in that NFC Championship game against the San Francisco 49ers. And so I think with Nolan Smith, he does everything else really well. Can drop into coverage, sets the edge at an elite level in terms of being a run defender. I think can, move around a little bit and be multifaceted and positionless. You'd like to see a little bit more pass rush production, pass rush finishing from him. Only, I think, 6 sacks in the past 2 seasons at Georgia. But obviously his injury, I think at the end of this season or against Florida, where he tore his pectoral muscle, I think impacted the way his numbers finished. But even with him being out and missing the back half of the season for Georgia, you saw just how impactful he was by cheering on this team from the sideline, by coaching these guys up. You heard Kirby Smart say it after the national championship game. A not insignificant amount of the Ohio State win came from Nolan Smith just because of his demeanor on the sideline and how much he meant to this team. And so I think, the teams at the end of the first round, and when I say the end, I mean the very end, Philadelphia at pick 30 and Kansas City at pick 31. I think those are 2 teams that are going to look long and hard at Nolan Smith. Given his championship pedigree, I think he should fit in well there. We've seen the Eagles go heavy on Georgia players in recent years with Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis in last year's draft. The Chiefs have long been admirers of guys that come out of Georgia. Mecole Hardman comes to mind there. They have Malik Herring on the team right now. I think those are 2 teams at the end of the first round that could take a long look at Nolan Smith and have him come potentially right in and fit in with that championship DNA.
He reminds me of Hassan Reddick coming out. I pulled their numbers too. We'll have that at the combine, but there's some similarities there in terms of how big they are and how they move around. So we'll see what that looks like there. But I just wrote down, he's just juicy. I mean, he's got big time juice and burst coming off the edge. He can change directions. He's got a good feel at the top of his rush. He can bend and close. He'll grab the wrist. He's got, a really good job of controlling the wrist of opponents. One of the plays with him, you're watching Auburn, it's special teams. They run a fake punt. He sniffs it out, makes a play. Just showed you the overall football player that he is. Just a really good player.
So, yeah, Daniel Jeremiah touching there on Nolan Smith. We heard him talk about Jalen Carter, Broderick Jones there. It's going to be a really big week for Georgia to once again make a statement. Now, yes, they're going to have 12 players there. Alabama's going to have 13. But I think you saw last year just how important this week was, just how much everyone was talking about the Georgia football program in terms of what they bring in and what these kind of players are coming out of the program. And if you don't think that this week matters from a Georgia perspective, it absolutely does from a recruiting standpoint. This is a chance where these recruits get to see how these players were developed, how their athleticism translates to testing in front of NFL teams. And while, the final results come in the NFL draft, if NFL people are talking about Georgia people nonstop this week, the same way that they were last season, you're going to have a lot of recruits take notice of that, because the number one thing that recruits are looking for is A, your ability to win a championship, and B, your ability to get them to the next level. Darnell Washington is a perfect example of this, in the story I wrote on DawgNation today sort of hit at that. When he came to Georgia, he was a 5-star prospect, rated as an athlete, and Kirby Smart said he had one goal in mind, getting to the NFL. Georgia got him to the NFL and might get him there as a first-round pick, which, well, yes, Washington was a 5-star prospect, was by no means a guarantee, given how raw Washington was coming into the University of Georgia. And so if you're able to develop a player like Washington into a first-round pick, who there's not a lot of precedent for doing that with a guy of that size, much less at the position at tight end, while Georgia, yes, has had a ton of tight end success in recent years, 4 straight drafts with a player taken. The highest one taken was Trey McKitty, who went pick number 97. Washington will go much higher than that. And if you're able to put a player like him into the first round, a year after having, 5 defensive players taken in the first round, you have Broderick Jones join him in the first round there. George Pickens had an excellent rookie season. for the Pittsburgh Steelers there. I think, when you continue to put these guys in these positions at the NFL, especially where you haven't had long-term success. So like defensive line now, after not having a first-round pick there for, I think 19 years, 2003 prior to last year was the last time that Georgia had a first-round defensive lineman. They're going to have 4 in 2 straight drafts and potentially back-to-back number 1 overall picks at the defensive line position there. When you're able to do that, when you're able to put in guys across a variety of positions into the NFL, that just raises the overall tide of your specific program, not to make an Alabama reference there. But I think going forward, when you put so many guys in the NFL, this is the biggest reason, in my opinion, why Alabama had been able to sustain their success for so long. They were just an NFL factory, and that really appealed to recruits. And eventually, when you start landing talented recruits, they develop into really good college players. They win you a lot of championships. They go on and get drafted very high in the NFL. Recruits take notice of all of that, and eventually it just starts spinning and working itself like clockwork. And I think that's why Alabama has been as successful as it has. And I think it's a big reason why Georgia of late has been as successful as it has. And so as Georgia continues that cycle, the performances at the NFL Combine this week are going to be very important for that. And so I'll be interested in seeing how those guys perform, what those guys have to say. I know from the media side, a lot of people like to make big things about, how they interview and how they talk to reporters and whatnot. The most important thing, or one, what is said behind those closed doors in team meetings, and 2, how they test and how they run at those events. And so how that ultimately plays out, I think will be fascinating to watch for the Georgia football program. And on that note, if you've got any questions, comments, go ahead and ask away. Busy sports weekend. Georgia basketball falls to Missouri on Saturday. Georgia baseball takes 3 out of 4 from Princeton. Chris Kirk wins on the PGA Tour. He wins the Honda Classic, his first win since 2015. Very cool moment for him. Story up on DawgNation talking about that. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, where things might be, go ahead, ask away. Let's see. Joseph Kennedy, the Pittsburgh Steelers probably should have gotten the ball more to George Pickens last year. I thought he had a really strong rookie season. Clearly had a connection with Kenny Pickett, and I think, there's a very positive step forward for George Pickens in that Pittsburgh offense. And if Broderick Jones somehow is there at 17 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think they should race to the podium to draft him because they need offensive line help. And I think Broderick Jones would fit in very well there in Pittsburgh and help Kenny Pickett and George Pickens in that offense. Let's see. Thoughts, comments, questions. Yeah, we're not going to talk about the XFL. It's not very interesting, or real football for that matter. Do they televise the Combine? Yes, you can watch most of the coverage on NFL Network. I know at some point this week there will be live drill coverage on ESPN. I know on Saturday, quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends work out. On Sunday, running backs and offensive linemen work out. I believe defensive ends or defensive line works out on Thursday, and then linebackers, off-ball linebackers, and cornerbacks work out on, or defensive backs rather, work out on Friday. So sort of going about that way, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Robert Beal are going to be Thursday guys. Chris Smith, Kelee Ringo are going to be your Friday guys. Stetson Bennett, Kearis Jackson, Darnell Washington are going to be your Saturday guys. And then on Sunday, you'll have Kenny McIntosh, Broderick Jones, and Warren McClendon as your Sunday guys there. Carter 40-time prediction. Last year, Devontae Wyatt was a little bit slimmer than Jalen Carter, ran a 4.77. I think if Jalen Carter could get in those low 4.8s, that's sort of the time that I'm looking for around there, 4.83. I think, again, 40-yard dash is not very important to a defensive lineman. I think the short area quickness is what you're looking for there. I think Aaron Donald ran a 4.63 40 at 6'1". Jalen is obviously a little bit bigger than that and thus has a longer stride. Look, if he wants to go out there and throw something wild out there, I could totally see it. But I think the low 4.8s is probably where Jalen Carter is looking. If I had to make a prediction on what his 40 time is going to be. Let's see. JC, who do I think will be the better safety prospect? Or who do you all think was a better safety? I'm going to say Chris Smith here. And yes, Richie was incredibly important. I think especially to building the foundation of what Georgia did. And, the end of his career was incredibly unfortunate because he was playing at such a high level before his obvious motorcycle injury there that sort of ended his career and really, I think, hurt his NFL draft future. But I think when you look at Chris Smith, what he did in his career, a captain for this team last year, 3-year starter, won 2 national championships, had the big interception returned for a touchdown against Clemson, had an interception in the national championship game, had the big blocked field goal return for a touchdown against LSU, forced a fumble in a national championship game against TCU. This guy, he's not as flashy as Richie LeCounte. He wasn't the 5-star prospect, but guy made play after play after play for 2 seasons. I think really embodied what this team in 2022 was about and was a pretty doggone good player in 2021 there as well. It's no disrespect to Richard LeCounte, but if I'm asked to take between the two, I think I'm taking Chris Smith. Let's see. Keith Lamb, how do I see the quarterback battle shaping out? Carson Beck's going to enter spring practice as the favorite. I think with what we've seen from him so far, now granted, yes, it's a new system with Mike Bobo, but I don't expect it to change all that much. I'd probably sit here and tell you that against UT Martin, Carson Beck is going to get your number 1 reps, but I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton take meaningful reps in that game there as well. I expect this competition to sort of drag along and Georgia to take this as long as they can go. I know they really want to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster on scholarship. And so, the decision if one of those guys wants to transfer from May 1st to May 15th will certainly be worth watching there. But I think Georgia's going to give all these guys a fair shot. And each of these guys brings something different. Beck, I think, has probably the sharpest arm right now. Whereas I think Gunnar Stockton is maybe the closest in mold to what Stetson was for Georgia a season ago. And then I think Vandagriff is a mix of the two of them there. I think mentally, Carson Beck's probably a little bit farther along than those two are, but I expect Georgia to make this as fair a competition as they can be and want to have a very solid answer as to who their quarterback is going to be entering the 2023 season. Let's see. Thoughts, comments? So I sort of just touched on this here. I think, given how soft that opening schedule is for Georgia, they open the season against UT Martin, then they host Ball State at home, they host South Carolina on the 16th, and then they host UAB. I think they're going to use those 4 games to solidify that quarterback rotation, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if we see Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton take real reps in those games along with Carson Beck, because I think you want to know. And look, 2020 showed you, Dewan Mathis didn't have it when he was named the starter against Arkansas. Stetson Bennett came in. Stetson Bennett got hurt against Florida, got replaced by JT Daniels. They had to start 3 different quarterbacks this season. Well, we can all sit here and think that Carson Beck or whoever you might think, Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton, is going to be the guy to start the season. Football just doesn't play the way we all think it should. And so I think it's important to have as many capable options as you can. And so Georgia is going to want to know what it has in both not just Carson Beck, but Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton. And so having that and getting to see what those guys look like in real reps, Brock Vandagriff has thrown 3 career passes. Gunnar Stockton has thrown 0. I think Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo are going to be interested in seeing what those guys look like in real reps. Let's see. Thoughts, a few more comments or questions. Let's see. G Bama boy. G Bama boy. Chris Smith intercepted Bryce Young in the national championship game. So I guess you just either block that game out from your memory, which I would understand given, the way it ended for Alabama there that day, or you just ignored the Clemson game when he had a pick 6 and the game's only touchdown there. So, I guess you've got maybe a selective memory there. Senyo G, does Tyke start over Dan at safety? I will say no to that. I think Tyke Smith could be your starting star potentially, and what they do is maybe move Javon Bullard to that safety position there. I think, I'm really interested in what they do with Javon Bullard this spring. Obviously, they could elect to keep him at star. He had, I think, 2 great games against Ohio State and TCU in the college football playoff there and really sort of came into his own as a starter at the end of that season. Do you move him to safety and maybe play Smoke Bowie or Tyke Smith at that star position? At the safety spot, you've also got David Daniel-Sisvana, along with Dan Jackson there as well. Janelle Aguero is someone who's going to have a lot of interest surrounding him, given, he was a highly rated freshman coming into the program and will be with the team this spring. So how those safety and star spots work out opposite Malachi Starks, I think, is one of the more underrated storylines to follow this spring for Georgia. Let's see. Let's see. Thoughts, comments. Yes, Senyo, you also bring up Marvin Jones Jr. He is not going to be participating in spring drills. He had shoulder surgery to repair a long stemming issue there. That outside linebacker position, I know I've seen some other people mention Samuel Mpemba. The guy, if you're, Chaz Chambliss is going to be the guy who gets a lot of the reps and has already played a bunch. If you're looking for a freshman or a young name, Damon Wilson is probably maybe the most interesting there. I think also what they do with Darius Smith is really interesting. They moved him around a lot last year, played him a little bit there in the secondary. And so I think going forward, what they do with both Smith and Damon Wilson is going to be very interesting this spring. Let's see. Thoughts, comments. Might do one or two more and hop on out of here. Yeah, and Bobo's headset brings us up about Carson Beck. Look, he looked good again in the national championship game. If you get a chance, go back and watch. I think what he did against Vanderbilt. I think that was maybe a moment that opened a lot of people's eyes, mine in particular, to maybe what Carson Beck could do going forward for Georgia. I think they really let him, quote unquote, cook in that game and show off some of his skills. I think his best pass was actually an incompletion where, Kearis Jackson's toe was an inch out of bounds, but I thought he really threaded the needle there very well. And while, yes, he was doing it against backups, you still like to see that. And you can think back to Alabama in 2017, the success that Tua Tagovailoa had against backups and blowouts early on in that season probably gave him and Alabama some confidence that he could step in and for Jalen Hurts in the national championship game, which is exactly what he ended up doing there. So I think, those reps, even in while some might see, it's against Vanderbilt, it's against a blowout team, those reps matter. And so I thought he looked much better in 2022 than he did in 2021, say against UAB or against Vanderbilt in a similar situation the season before. You know what? We've got about 32, 33 minutes here tonight, so that'll probably do it for us tonight. We'll probably have a ton of combine stuff to talk about in the week ahead. Obviously, keep it tuned here. You have Mike Griffith tomorrow night. You will have Brandon Adams back from his cruise every Monday through Friday, though he had a show every day last week, I would point out. And if you're watching here now, get on him because he insisted that we all give our Mount Rushmores and have to face the wrath of the people that disagreed with it. He, very politically skated on doing that. So make sure if you're watching DawgNation Daily tomorrow or at any point this week, as you should, press Brandon Adams on who he thinks his Mount Rushmore of Georgia players, I should specify here, should be. Because while obviously I think if you're doing a Georgia football Mount Rushmore, Vince Dooley and Kirby Smart are obviously on it. I think if you're doing players, I don't think Kirby Smart should be on it there. So if you're watching DawgNation Daily this week, make sure you press Brandon Adams about who he thinks should be on the Georgia Mount Rushmore. I went with Herschel Walker, David Pollock. I think those two guys are unassailable. They are the only two three-time All-Americans. I went with Stetson Bennett. I think he's got a pretty strong case there as well, given, starting quarterback for a two-time national champion and was a Heisman finalist and did a whole lot for this program. And then this is maybe me trying to be too smart. I went with Brock Bowers. Look, through 2 years, no pass catcher in Georgia program history has been statistically more productive than Brock Bowers. He's already a two-time All-American. He is a Mackey Award winner. And maybe, again, I'm projecting ahead to next year. But if he goes out and replicates what he did in his first 2 years, I think he's pretty clearly going to be one of the four best players to ever play for the Georgia football program. So a little bit of Mount Rushmore there. Obviously, Jeff Sentell was a huge recruiting event today in Carrollton, Georgia. He's going to have a ton of scoop coming out of that this week as well there as he's got Before the Hedges on Wednesday. And we'll be back here again next Sunday, recapping the Combine. We're another week closer to spring practice, expected to start on March 14th. G-Day is set for April 15th. Georgia's Pro Day is set for March 15th. But This week, all eyes will be on the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Mike Griffith is going to be there. I'm going to have a ton of stuff coming out from the event as well. So make sure to stay tuned into DawgNation, as always, for the latest on Georgia news. My name is Connor Riley. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been Connor in Coverage.